Jim Murphy from Go Forward. Welcome to our offices here in downtown Chicago. I've got the pleasure of interviewing Rob Levitt today from Butcher and Larder and Local Foods. Welcome, Rob.
My pleasure, sir.
Good to
Thanks
have
for
you
having
here.
me.
Good to have you here. Rob, my viewers, they like to know a little bit about, your earlier years, earlier days. Why don't you give them a little background? Did you grow up in the Chicagoland area? Did you grow up somewhere else? What'd you do?
Sure. I grew up in Wheeling, Illinois, which is about 40 minutes northwest suburb of Chicago. I have a brother. My parents, my mom was a teacher. My dad worked downtown for years, and pretty normal childhood. My mom cooked dinner every night. That's probably why I love food so much. And then I went to University of Illinois. I got a degree in music. I was a saxophone major, and I gave that up when I started washing dishes, and I really kind of fell in love with the idea of being in a professional kitchen. And from there, I worked in some pretty good restaurants. I went to New York, enrolled in the Culinary Institute of America, big school out there, and met my wife. I lived in New York for a little while, and then came back to Chicago and spent a good long time working in restaurants all over the city until we opened our own place in 2008.
Tell us a little bit everybody knows about the University of Illinois, great school. We're big fans here in Illinois. But tell us about the Culinary Institute of America. What was that like? Was that a year program, 2 years, 6 months? What was that?
So the program that I did was a 2-year program. It's an associate's degree. At the time, that was kind of the main program there. They had a 2-year culinary program, a 2-year pastry program, and they were just starting a bachelor's program. Bachelor's is much more popular now. But you spend 18 weeks taking classes and learning basic skills and sauces and all of the kinds of basic things they think you need. And then they send you out into the workforce and you do what they call an externship for another 18 weeks. And that can be in a restaurant or a country club or a resort or a cruise ship or anything that is food service. And then you come back and you do 18 more weeks where you take a wines class and you learn all about wine tasting and wine pairing, that kind of thing. You work in some restaurants on campus so that all the students get some experience both cooking and as a server. And then from there, they cut you loose.
So you met your wife in New York?
I did.
Brought her back. And so you have a family here in Chicago now?
We do. We live on the north side of Chicago, and we have a daughter. She just turned 7 on Saturday. She's a first grader. She's way smarter than me.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't take long.
So before you had your own restaurant, what was your favorite restaurant you worked at?
Oh, that's a tough question. So when I was on my externship from culinary school, and then after I graduated, I worked at a restaurant in New York called the Park Avenue Cafe. Sadly, it's no longer there. And there was a chef there named Neil Murphy. He was the chef de cuisine. And he will forever be a tremendous mentor of mine. He taught me a lot of very fundamental things about how to work as a cook and how to think about food and how to taste food. And I still keep in touch with him, even though this was 20-some years ago. But that experience really, really shaped me as a cook. And then I'd say second to that, I worked at a place right down the street from here called 312 Chicago.
Yeah.
That is the first place I ever butchered a pig. It's the first place I ever made a sausage. It's, well, without the exception of school, but like really practically making things to then sell to people. And the chef there was a gentleman named Dean Zanella. He doesn't work there anymore, but he's still in Chicago. He taught me a lot about how to manage and how to work with people and how to write a menu and how to approach it, both from a making delicious food perspective, but also from a how does this make good business sense perspective. We was a corporate restaurant. We had a corporate office in San Francisco we had to answer to about all of our numbers, and so I had to learn very quickly as a sous chef how to make delicious food that people wanted to buy and enjoy, but then also how to justify all the expenses and things like that. Dean is still a good friend. He's still a mentor. And it was a very, very, very good experience for me.
So eventually, you and your wife opened your own restaurant.
We did.
Why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. 2008, we opened a restaurant in the Wicker Park, Bucktown area called Motto. It was a small place, about 50 seats, very simple, very rustic. Over the course of our careers up until that point, we had decided that the thing that was most important to us was the sourcing of the ingredients we used and just good, solid cooking technique. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, just good, solid food. And we made the decision at that point to, as much as we could on our menu, only buy products from small local farms, things that were in season and raised nearby. That included committing to only working with whole animals. with the exception of beef, because beef is so enormous and we just didn't have the labor or really the space for it. So we would buy whole pigs, whole lamb, whole chickens, any other animals we could, and then with our beef farmers, we would just ask them for whatever pieces that they had that nobody else wanted, as an effort to continue to support them from a sustainable standpoint.
And that was within your restaurant. You started that in your restaurant. You
Yep.
Buying the pieces that other people didn't want.
Yep, that's what we did for beef, and everything else we would bring in whole. Farmers loved us. I had a beef farmer once at a conference tell a whole panel full of people, it was like, anything we have left over, we just call Rob at Motto and he'll take it all. And so we were serving hearts and tongues and livers and things like that, and people were buying it. It was the greatest thing. For a while when we first opened up, we had a farmer say, I've got 80 pounds of hanger steak that nobody wants. And I said, I'll take it all. And for months, for years, we would take all the hanger steak this guy had, and then it started getting really, really popular. And then, then he'd call us up and say, I have 60 pounds of hanger steak. If I have 40 pounds of hanger steak, but So then we started moving into some more interesting things, and we had, we were cooking beef heart all the time, and it was selling like crazy. I put beef tongue on the menu as an appetizer, and I never thought I'd say, yeah, we'd sell out of 10 beef tongue in a weekend, but we did. And it was great that people were interested in eating some interesting things that were maybe a little bit challenging, but because we were so focused on cooking things really well, it came across as being really delicious, and people liked it.
So there's a point in time when you decide the restaurant business is going to be in your past, and the butcher shop, you're going to open a butcher shop. Tell us about that process and that decision making, and what got you interested. Besides, it sounds like you've worked with the whole animal already, but how was that process, and what were some of the other influences in making that decision? So
we had committed to this whole animal program at the restaurant. Excuse me, and that was a challenge, and we were getting a lot of really positive press for it. We were doing butchering demonstrations on the weekends, and that was doing well enough so that we didn't have to do Sunday brunch anymore. And we were just getting a lot of attention for it. And that came in the form of, it was a woman in California who was writing a book called Primal Cuts, and it was all about chefs and butchers all over the country that were kind of going back to the way things used to be, and butchering whole animals and making their own sausages and their own cured meats, and this sort of butcher renaissance. And she asked if we wanted to be included in this book. So we were kind of having a hard time with the restaurant. We had gotten all this good press, and we were in this book, and we were flipping through a teaser promotional thing that she had for the book. And there was a little butcher shop in LA that was just about to open, and there was some guys in Brooklyn that were opening this cool little whole animal shop, and in Seattle, and these little places all over. And one of my cooks turned to me and said, "Why don't you do that here?" And I just kind of shrugged it off. And then, I don't know if it was later that night or if it was a couple days later, but I was talking to my wife, and she said, "Why don't we do that here?" I said, "Well, I don't know, why not?" So we talked to some people, and we rounded up a very comically small amount of capital, and we found a space that we really liked, where the landlord was super into food and thought what we were doing was cool, and he gave us the space for a song. And we got some great deals on some used equipment that just kind of fell in place, and we opened up a little butcher shop. The funny thing is, I say this often, but I never opened that store because I wanted to be a butcher. I never thought, this is what I want to do ultimately with my career, is be a butcher. But the thing that was important to me were these relationships with these farmers. We'd gotten to know a lot of these people over the course of the years that we were at the restaurant, and some even before that from other jobs we'd had. And it was really great that at that time, 2008, 9, 10, restaurants of all calibers, but particularly higher end restaurants, were really focusing again on where their ingredients were coming from. And we were seeing small family farms start to take a very prominent place on the menus of really respected high end restaurants. And people were seeking those restaurants out. People who were interested in food were going to these places because they knew they were getting better products. Coupled with the fact that there was great wine and great cooking, and these dishes were wonderful, they They were very conscious of where the food was coming from. And we saw that at our restaurant. That's why people really liked to eat with us, because they came in there knowing not only would food be good, but they felt good about what they were eating. And we thought if there's enough people who want to go out to dinner for that, then we felt like there were enough people in the city who would want to shop and have that same quality product at home to cook for their families. And that's really was the big push towards opening the store.
I can remember as a very young person going to a butcher shop. Can you even remember, were they in your town of Wheeling when you grew up?
No, of course not. I mean, there were a few little meat markets left, but it was all commodity product. It was all stuff that, was nothing like it was in the old days. And I think that I would hear stories, from people that said, well, my grandfather was come to our demos on the weekends at the restaurant. My grandfather was a butcher. My great uncle was a butcher, and it's really cool to see this again, and to see people doing this and getting back into the craft. And that meant a lot to hear these sorts of things. And I think, rather than wanting to bring butchering back into fashion, I was more interested in that sort of small community aspect of what the butcher shop represented. Like you remember going to butcher shops, I'm sure you remember going to other little vegetable markets, and that's what people's lives were like back then. They went to the specialty little places in their community to get those things, and you develop relationships, not just with farmers in this case, but you also develop a relationship with the people in your immediate community and in your city. And it was great that we were featured in magazines and on websites and had all this great press come our way, but really the most satisfying thing was that we saw the same families coming in weekend after weekend, and we would see kids growing up, and being part of that community where you get people to come in because they want to be there and they want to try new things, and they trust you. We always say people come in, and if they don't quite get what we're doing, because people don't shop at butcher shops anymore, we very actively sell them the things they're comfortable with. So you come into the Butcher and Louder for the first time, and we're more than happy to sell you a boneless, skinless chicken breast, or a ribeye, or a pound of ground beef for some hamburgers or something like that. And we really want you to be comfortable and to get to know us and to try the product and taste how good it is compared to what you buy at the supermarket. And 9 times out of 10, that approach works. People come back and they say, boy, those are the best burgers we ever had. And one of my favorite stories is about a gentleman who became a very good customer of ours, and he had a little boy who was, he was 6 or 7 when we opened, and I saw the kid, grow up. And he didn't really know the proper terminology, like how to describe what he was eating, but the guy bought a chicken, he roasted a chicken for his kid like he did every week. And he said, the chicken was really wet. And it was a strange thing, but we figured out what he meant was that it was really juicy and delicious and savory, and it really made it. And he said he's never seen this kid eat so much chicken in one sitting, and so from then on, that's all he could buy. And I love stories like that, because it's we're teaching another generation that there is a difference in where your food comes from.
So you mentioned a chef or two that helped you through the process of starting to learn how to work with a whole animal, but you must have had mentors in the business that you looked up to, that somewhere, anywhere in the world, that because there weren't that many of them, but who was it? How did you actually get the training needed to be a butcher besides just teaching yourself?
Well, there was, I got a little bit of training in school. There's a instructor at the CIA named Thomas Schneller. The guy is, 5th generation, I think, German butcher, and just a wonderful guy, and he was always more than willing to answer any questions I had. Before we opened the store, I actually went to a shop in Brooklyn for 3-4 days called the Meat Hook, and those guys are great. They're still good friends of mine, and they still, we still go back and forth asking each other questions. They came and visited the store, and that's a great relationship to have. I'd say one of my heroes is a guy in Tuscany. His name is Dario Cecchini, and he has kind of been one of the most vocal advocates for keeping the trade, the skill going, because it's very easy all over the world now to just get stuff in packages, and butcher shops, even in Europe, are starting to fade a little bit, but this guy is going strong, and his message is very much like we have a responsibility to the farmers and to these animals to treat them right and to do great things with them, and to, as a butcher, it's our responsibility to make sure we are finding the very best products we can, that we are finding farmers that are raising animals right and treating these animals well and feeding them well, and so that we can take them and we can respect them in the way that we cut them and then pass that along to our customers. And that butchers need to be knowledgeable in how to cook all these things so that we can bring people into our store and get them comfortable with the product itself, but then also send them home feeling good about how to cook it. And he's...
Can't you do that on Amazon with a YouTube video?
There's a lot of YouTube videos out there that I looked to when I was first learning, and it's just not the same. It's just not the same. It's the internet has done a lot for the food business. A lot of good stuff, a lot of bad stuff. But in terms of that connection to your food, I mean, that's really what guys like me are pushing for, and that's what we're learning from guys like Dario, is that he makes a big spectacle of what he does, and it's a big show, and it's a lot of entertainment, but it keeps him in the international spotlight. And then if you dig just a tiny bit deeper into what all this show is about, you realize that he's sourcing animals from a small family farm, and he's growing his own fennel in his backyard so that he can harvest the fennel pollen so he can make traditional Tuscan things, and he's really trying to keep the idea of the Tuscan butcher alive in Tuscany. And it's really cool. It's really cool to watch. I had the pleasure of cutting with him at an event in San Francisco as a group. The same woman that wrote that book I was telling you about, she and another woman put together a group called the Butchers Guild, and it's this sort of online society of butchers all over the country. And they had this big event where we all got together and we got to know one another, which was really great. But then they brought in Dario Cecchini, and he broke down hind quarter of beef for us and showed us the way he does everything and all the different dishes that he makes. And then we went back to a butcher shop with these giant steaks that he cut, and he was cooking for us, and we sat around a big table and had this big meal and drank wine. And then the next day, bright and early, we all got up and we got to cut a pig with him. So it was me and a handful of other butchers, some of which I'm still really good friends with, and Dario, this legend, this icon, and we're all cutting a pig together. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was such a great experience because he was showing us these cuts, and he's like, well, this is how you guys cut this in America, and this is how they cut this in other parts of the world, but this is how I do it. And he showed us this one particular thing from the shoulder, and he cut these little bone-in shoulder chops, and he took a couple from everybody's pig, and he brought a special seasoning that he makes in Tuscany and this fennel pollen that he harvested from his own, field of fennel. And he, we took a break at some point, and he cooked these. We're standing around this kitchen, and it's 10 in the morning, and we're drinking red wine out of paper cups, and he's cooking these pork chops, and it was just the greatest thing, and it was delicious. But, just having a great time and learning from the master himself. And the guy didn't speak much English, but he's still very interested in working with people and talking and communicating and seeing how people do things differently and showing how he's been doing things and how his generations before him of his family have been cutting and producing and making things. And I think that idea is largely behind why I wanted to open a butcher shop. It was just to be part of people's lives and to share something that I think is pretty special and to bring these wonderful products from these small family farms into people's homes, and to show people that people are familiar with certain cuts, the ones that you see at high-end restaurants, the ones that you see in the supermarkets, but in an attempt to get people to be comfortable with eating really good quality, we learned how to sort of extend the reach of these animals. Dario said there are no great cuts of meat, there are only great animals. And from that, it means that everything available off of these animals is going to be top quality. It's going to be the best you can possibly buy, even though it's not a ribeye or a fillet.
Let's take the next step and talk a little bit about what the partnership with local foods has allowed Butcher and Larder to become, and what has it done to help you grow your business, grow your influence in the marketplace?
Sure. I mean, the idea of expanding had always been on my mind. At the old store, we had a team. I was 1,200 square foot. We had a 7-foot walk-in cooler. I mean, it was a tiny little place. So when the opportunity came to move in with local foods, it was great because we could extend our reach and really, I had a really great staff of people, and they were all outgrowing that storefront. So this gave people an opportunity to really kind of spread their wings a little bit and stretch out and do some more interesting things with the product that we had. So we were able to produce more sausages. We were able to make more bacon than we ever had before. All these staple things that people came in for. At the old store, they'd sell out by Sunday afternoon. And now we can always have bacon. We can always have deli ham for people to put in their kids' lunches. We can always have a nice mix of sausages. And of course, the big thing for me was that we were able to get a license to make our own cured meats. We used to do it in a stairwell behind a homemade false wall. And now we have a big, beautiful 400 square foot room where we can hang all kinds of different cured meats. And that's something that our customers really love and they really wanted. And when we told them that would eventually be possible, the people in our community were excited. And now when we put that stuff in the deli case, a whole culatello sells out in a day and a half. And
Let's just take a minute and explain
Sure.
to our viewers what it means to create a prosciutto. Or
Sure.
What does it mean to do that?
Sure. So, we get whole pigs, and there's a ton of different ways to use all these different parts. And, when I first learned to butcher a pig, I was reading a book by a guy, and he said that when he first learned, he went to Italy, went to his family, and there was I forget his aunt or his uncle had a little farm in the middle of Italy, and every year in the fall, the butcher would come to their farm, and they would take the 2 pigs they'd raised all year, and they would turn them into all the things they needed to survive the winter. And that included things to cook right away, things to cook eventually, and things that they would salt and cure and hang so that months from now they had meat to eat. And that's sort of the Italian tradition that I learned from. So that means that you take the hind leg off of a pig, and that's the ham. And that can turn into a number of different things, but to make a prosciutto, you trim it up just so, and you get it ready, and you salt it. And that's pretty much it. You cover it in salt, and you let it sit for certain, I've got formulas and all kinds of things for how long. And then once it's been on the salt for a long enough time, you wipe it off, and you hang it in a room that is set at a specific temperature and humidity. And a year later, you have a finished cured ham.
So it takes 12 months.
At least. Depending on all kinds of factors, it can take 12 months, it can take 14 months. Some people leave them for up to 3 years. And some of that is just for to develop flavor further. And some of it is just because of the nature of that particular breed of pig takes a little longer, or because of their setup, their environment, maybe their humidity is a little higher. But I'd say generally speaking, it takes about a year. And from there, you can kind of gauge it, how much further you want to go. But a year is a long time to invest in a product like that. So it winds up being a pretty special thing. In the old days, it was survival. It was, we'll put up the hams this year so that next year we have ham to eat. And now it's something that we do because it's fun and delicious. But the thing about something like a prosciutto or a culatello, which is a sort of a boneless variation on the prosciutto, it really shows off the quality of the meat. So, you can take a pork chop home and you can cook it. It's the best pork chop I ever had. But when you let something change like that over a period of time, it's going through all these different, sort of chemical reactions, and there's enzymes that are working on, it's a very sort of complex thing for just a piece of meat and a bunch of salt. But then the finished product, you taste it, and you really taste the difference when you have the pork of the quality that we do.
In your work at Local Foods, your role is always changing, evolving, growing. Currently, you are introducing your products to a large number of chefs around Chicago, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I one time saw you on stage directly before or after Rick Bayless one time. And you seem to, I think I remember he introduced you. I'm wondering about, as an example, your relationship with him. What is that about? How did it evolve, and where's it at today?
I think Chicago's very lucky to have Rick Bayless as an advocate for the food community here. Chicago is a great city for supporting small farms and sustainable food and just knowing where your product from. being able to interact with him the way I have has been a real privilege. You know, it's been really great. He very much supports what we do. He's very humble about it. You know, he would come into our restaurant. He came into the old butcher shop. You know, he asks a lot of questions. He really gets interested in what you do at a very sort of fundamental level. And it's really a great experience to have somebody of that caliber and that degree of success talk to somebody like me as though he has something to learn. It makes you feel pretty good about yourself. And you know, having these experiences, I've done everything I can without being a nag to keep that relationship going. And you know, we meet up at events and we see each other in the city from time to time. And you know, we always have a really pleasant conversation. And I always leave there feeling like, you know, I have this guy's support. And you know, it's great. He's a kind of mentor. He's the kind of person who will talk to anybody about food if it means he has something to learn. He's a very smart guy when it comes to the business end of things, but he's also a great example for people all over this country in that you can build, you know, you can build a company like he has. You know, these restaurants are really busy and they're making a lot of money and they're doing really well and it's growing, and you know, the amount of money that he spends with small family farms is staggering. You know, if he switched all of that to commodity growers, then he would probably, I mean, his profits would go through the roof. But instead, he really practices what he preaches. I mean, if you take a tour of the Frontera Topolo kitchens, I mean, these guys buy up corn in such massive quantities so that they can preserve it and have great product to use all year long, so that all their tamales are being made from this amazing cornmeal and like all these peppers that they want to use in their sauces and salsas, that like it's all good product coming from small family farms. And that is such a great example to guys like me and to young cooks coming up and to people who just don't think it can be done. It can, you know.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Talk to me a little bit about, you know, one of the things that we think about with small family farms is we think about expensive.
Sure.
Okay, I mean, the price for a New York strip can be a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
How can a family that's on a budget buy meat from you, okay, or from your butcher shop? How is that possible? Is it possible?
Of course it's possible, and that's one of the building blocks, one of the main tenets of why we even exist, is because we want people to understand that you don't have to have a lot of money to eat really good product. And there's a few different ways to approach it. The main thing is that, you know, there are a lot of different cuts on these animals, and they're not all super expensive. And also, just because you're buying, you know, meat from a fancy butcher shop doesn't mean it has to be some kind of bizarro cut that you've never heard of before. I mean, it can be. And my staff is really good at sort of demystifying some of the names you've never seen before. You know, if it's a steak, you cook it like a steak. And that's almost always true with some of these less common cuts. But we also want people to feel really comfortable. So, you know, you can come to our store and you can buy ground beef for a burger, and I think people don't think that is possible. You can buy a whole chicken or a boneless, skinless chicken breast, and, you know, I think some part of the perception is that this is a fancy butcher shop, they only have expensive or weird things. And that's not at all true. But we do have a trained staff that is really happy to walk people through the process. You know, it's like you've got this many people and you don't have a ton of money to spend, that's fine. You know, we really want you to try these things. You know, and I think the other thing about it is that when you're using meat of this quality, you don't realize it, but it sort of satisfies you quicker because it's so rich and so savory and so flavorful. You don't need a 14-ounce ribeye to feel like you've had dinner. You can eat 6 ounces and be totally sated. And I think that's the kind of thing that, you know, big agriculture doesn't necessarily want you to know. They want you to go to the supermarket and buy these giant pork chops or steaks or whatever, but it's really not what we need. And it's not the healthiest diet. You know, it's funny to a lot of people because, you know, I'm the butcher, but I'm going to tell you should eat less meat. And doesn't sound like the best business plan, but when you're honest with people and when you tell them why, and you tell them that one steak will feed not 2 people but 4 people, and they trust you, then they come back and they're like, wow, you were right. And then, you know, it's sort of the long game. You get these people to trust that you know what you're doing and that you're going to steer them in the right direction, and then they come back over and over again, and you know, we have customers who one week they'll make burgers, and the next week they'll say, what's something I've never had before? And this is people who have all the money in the world, and this is people who are on a very tight budget. And we love having that sort of non-demographic of people. You know, we have college kids who are just really in tune with, you know, the food system and how it's going and what they can do, and they want to come and they want to buy product from us because they trust that we're getting it from good sources. And you know, the same thing applies to a lot of the restaurants that we sell to. You know, when I go into my restaurant customers, they know that I know what I'm doing. So they'll say, you know, I really want to put a steak on the menu, and we've been using these commodity New York strips, and I don't want to use commodity product anymore. So what do you got? Then I can go through our catalog and I can say, well, this is who we work with, and you know, we can get you this, this, or this, and you know, this is less common cut, but because it's better quality, you know, I can get it to you at a better price point, and you know, and you know, we can sort of talk about how to cook these things, but you kind of trust that these chefs know what they're doing. They just need to get their idea, their mind around the idea of this particular cut, and once they understand it, then they can take it and make it delicious. But what we're doing is we're introducing something a little more interesting and a lot more sustainable into what they're doing.
So Rob, this has been great talking to you and getting to know you better, and I think the viewers are going to really be pleased with watching this video. But I have a question. If a viewer was a chef or only cooked at home, or you know, had a question, is there a way in which that chef or can they email you, or can they somehow text you to kind of ask a question? Is there any way they can go online on the local food site and find out an answer to a question that maybe, because I mean, most people don't go to butcher school.
No, I didn't even go to butcher school. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get a hold of us. You can call the store. You can go, there's info@localfoods.com for sort of general questions. I mean, I encourage my customers, whether it's wholesale or retail customers, to email me directly. It's easy, it's rob@localfoods.com. You know, I really enjoy hearing from my customers on either side, and answering their questions and getting them more familiar with what we're doing, and encouraging them to really kind of dig in and have some fun with this stuff. You know, what my favorite part about that is, if I have a customer that's comfortable enough to reach out to me and say, you know, I bought this thing from you, or I saw this thing on your Instagram, and you know, I'd really like to make that, can you help me? Then it furthers that connection and that relationship. And you know, a lot of times these turn into a learning experience on my end. So a customer will say, oh, I saw you make porchetta, can you show me how to do that and sell me this stuff? And then they'll say, well, you know, my family used to make this dish, which this reminds me of, and they tell you all about it, and suddenly you're learning something about somebody else's culture, and you know, we can turn that into something that we then put in a case and sell, and that makes us look good, and it makes this customer really happy. Right. It's a customer for life. So, you know, I really encourage people to reach out and contact us as much as they can and let us answer all the questions they have, because we love that idea of the connection and the relationships. Great. It's important stuff.
This has been a blast. Thanks from everybody that was watching for sharing with us the knowledge and what you've learned over the years being a butcher.
My pleasure.
And believing in these small farms and protecting them as they try to grow and get a little bit bigger.
It's my pleasure. It's what we love to do.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, sir.
Okay.